The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Chapter 2, Paganism in Modern Dress. O God, the nations, that is, pagans, have invaded thine inheritance. Help us, O God, of our salvation. Psalm 79, verses 1 and 9. The things which the Gentiles, that is, pagans, sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God, and I do not want you to become sharers in demons. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20. Mind science, linking Christianity and sorcery. Ernest Holmes founded the Church of Religious Science, also known as the science of the mind, upon the supreme secret that the masters of wisdom revealed to Napoleon Hill. It is closely related to the positive thinking of Norman Vincent Peale and the possibility thinking of Robert Schuller. In fact, Peale credits Holmes with making him into a positive thinker. In 1958, Holmes prophesied, quote, "We have launched a movement which, in the next 100 years, will be the great new religious impulsion of modern times, destined to envelop the world." End of quote. Here's the way Holmes explained this supreme secret. Quote, "Science of mind teaches that the originating, supreme, creative power of the universe, the source of all substance, the life in all living things, is a cosmic reality principle which is present throughout the universe and in every one of us. Science of mind teaches that man controls the course of his life by mental processes which function according to a universal law, that we are all creating our own day-to-day experiences by the form and procession of our thoughts. Man, by thinking, can bring into his experience whatsoever he desires." End of quote. This most basic idea of ancient sorcery has taken firm hold in our modern world. It is the cornerstone of the human potential movement and the essential ingredient in success motivation PMA seminars. It has also become the major link between sorcery and Christianity. Though expressed in slightly different phrases, it is the common language of all those who have, wittingly or unwittingly, replaced faith in God with a self-serving faith in some mysterious force that can be used by our minds to get what we want. Norman Vincent Peale is, of course, one of the most successful evangelists of the power of the mind. He explains it like this, quote, "Your unconscious mind has a power that turns wishes into realities when the wishes are strong enough." End of quote. Is God a placebo? Robert Schuller's possibility thinking is the same product as Peale's positive thinking, marketed under a different brand name. Schuller declares, quote, "Now, believe and you will achieve." End of quote. Paul Meyer, the president of the Success Motivation Institute, expresses it in this way, quote, "Vividly imagine, sincerely believe, ardently desire, enthusiastically act, and it must inevitably come to pass." End of quote. Paul Yonggi Cho declares, quote, "Through visualization and dreaming, you can incubate your future and hatch the results." End of quote. Such teaching has confused sincere Christians into imagining that faith is a force that makes things happen because they believe. Thus, faith is not placed in God, but is a power directed at God, which forces Him to do for us what we have believed He will do. When Jesus said on several occasions, quote, "Your faith has saved you," that is, healed you, end of quote, He did not mean that there is some magic power triggered by believing, but that faith had opened the door for Him to heal them. If a person is healed merely because he believes he will be healed, then the power is in his mind, and God is merely a placebo to activate his belief. If everything works according to the laws of success, then God is irrelevant and grace obsolete. All one needs to do is to exercise Hill's power of belief. On an Amway motivational tape, Robert Schuller sums it up. Quote, "You don't know what power you have within you. You make the world into anything you choose. Yes, you can make your world into whatever you want it to be." End of quote. Such ideas are accepted in the world as sound PMA principles and are becoming increasingly popular within the church. For example, in March 1985, the large and evangelical Prestonwood Baptist Church in North Dallas, Texas, hosted the first annual Christian Leadership Conference. The featured speaker was Paul Yonggi Cho, who almost always presents excellent biblical teachings, sometimes unfortunately mixed with occult ideas of visualization and mind power. Sharing the platform with him on March 18th was Mary Kay Ash, founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics. In her talk, she indicated that she had learned some powerful success principles from a book by Claude Bristol. In fact, it is a classic example of basic occultism being passed off as mind power, accepted under that guise by Christians and confused for faith. Mrs. Ash said, quote, "Claude Bristol wrote a book called The Magic of Believing, and in that book he said, 'Is there something, a force, a factor or power, call it what you will, which a few people understand and use to overcome their difficulties, then to achieve outstanding success?' He," that is Bristol, said, "Gradually I discovered that there is a golden thread that makes life work. That thread can be named in a single word, belief." Now, I know that Bristol was not too concerned with what people believed. He simply saw in action the power of belief, and he recorded what he saw. End of quote. Faith in God, or faith in faith. Many sincere Christians have been influenced by the Sorcerer's gospel to imagine that faith has some power in itself. Once again, to them, faith is not placed in God, but is a power directed at God, which forces him to do for us what we have believed he will do. At the very least, this makes God subject to alleged laws that we can activate by faith. At worst, it eliminates God from the process altogether, putting everything in our own hands and thus turning us into gods who can make anything happen by our own power of belief. If everything works according to such a law, then God is no longer sovereign and there's no place for grace. All one needs to do is to exercise this power of belief. That is the basic idea behind sorcery. In contrast, Jesus said, "Have faith in God," Mark chapter 11, verse 22. Faith must have an object. It is unreserved and absolute trust in God. There is no one and nothing in the universe that can be trusted totally except God. True faith grows out of an obedient relationship with Him. God answers prayer on the basis of His sovereignty, wisdom, mercy, and grace, not because some law compels Him to act. He cannot be manipulated by man or angels through mental processes, spoken words, or any other device. The sorcerer's goal, masters of our fate. If we can make God or some cosmic force do our bidding by the thoughts we think or words we speak, then we have achieved the sorcerer's goal. We have become masters of our own fate and can make anything happen that we want to happen simply by believing that it will happen. The power is in our belief, and God Himself must do what we believe He will do, because whatever we believe must come to pass. Rampant among Christians today, this seductive idea is exactly what these masters taught Hill and exactly what he came to believe and teach, that he could become a master too. Quote, "Know your own mind, live your own life. You can make your life what you want it to be. Self-confident faith in yourself is an indispensable ingredient for good living. A healthy ego makes you more receptive to the influences which guide you from a region beyond the power of our five senses to know. Unseen, silent forces influence us constantly. There are unseen watchers. I can find faith which vastly enlarges my powers. Always I know I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." End of quote. That was the attractive bait on the hook, and it led Napoleon Hill ever deeper into sorcery. He rejected the God of the Bible and the Christian faith that his father crudely tried to force into him when he was a boy, and instead opted for an impersonal force or universal mind, which he called God. What Hill embraced was basic Hindu-Buddhist occultism, including reincarnation, spirit mediumship, and automatic writing. The promotion of sorcery is not hidden in an obscure sentence here or there, but is plainly declared as the major theme woven throughout his books. How the seduction enters the church. How then could Christian leaders read, apparently enjoy, and recommend to others Napoleon Hill's heretical and deeply occult books? Part of it is due to the fact that psychology or business success techniques are considered to be neutral and therefore not threatening to Christianity. The concepts of unlimited human potential and miraculous mind powers that presumably reside in that 90% of the brain we allegedly don't use are growing in popularity in the world and creating confusion in the church. Douglas and Roddy state, quote, God placed an incredible principle in the human mind, and if we are confident and positive and assured, God can use all of the chemistry that positiveness conjures up within us to help us accomplish whatever it is that we are seeking to do. End of quote. This is a mixture of truth and error that sincere Christian leaders are bringing into the church. Douglas and Roddy make it very clear that they are not, quote, endorsing the idea that a person ought to substitute positiveness for trusting in God, end of quote. Having said that, there's a sense of being on safe ground, and it is easy to fail to see the real danger. Substitution is not the big problem, since almost everyone would easily recognize and reject such obvious error. Confusion is the problem. There is not a word of caution to indicate that the major experts they quote or support are occultists. Napoleon Hill and W. Clement Stone, for example, talk about God in the books that Douglas and Roddy recommend, but their God is a metaphysical divine power that can be tapped into through mind power techniques. Hill and Stone don't substitute PMA for faith, but promote an even more dangerous idea, that PMA and faith are one and the same, that believing in the power of the mind is somehow the same as believing in God, that the human mind is some kind of magic talisman that wields a metaphysical force with infinite potential because somehow it is a part of what they call infinite intelligence. This is the God of the mind science cults and of the New Age. An ideal vehicle for the seduction. It would be impossible to understand our modern world without taking into consideration the way it has been shaped and molded by psychology. Nothing else even comes close to matching its influence upon the beliefs and lifestyles of contemporary society. Almost all of this has taken place since World War II, which, according to Life magazine, created the greatest upsurge of interest in psychology in history. In 1946, the U.S. Congress passed the National Mental Health Act, establishing a national program with federal funds. As a result, psychology courses exploded in universities across the country and spread rapidly from there to the seminaries. Prior to the war, few theological schools had even bothered to teach counseling courses involving psychology. But by the 1950s, almost all of them did, and over 80% were offering additional courses in psychology. Today, some of the biggest names on the psychological scene have come out of seminaries. Paul Vitz, who is a psychology professor at New York University, has written, quote, "Psychology as religion exists in great strength throughout the United States. It is deeply anti-Christian, yet it is extensively supported by schools, universities, and social programs financed by taxes collected from Christians. But for the first time, the destructive logic of the secular religion is beginning to be understood." End of quote. Already in 1951, Carl Rogers could boast that professional interest in psychotherapy was in all likelihood the most rapidly growing area of social sciences today. And now in the 1980s, psychology has attained the status of a guru whose scientific standards of behavior are relieving consciences of obedience to God's moral laws. In this way, as well as through its introduction of sorcery as science, psychology is the major change agent in transforming society. As investigative journalist Martin L. Gross has so well said, quote, "Psychology sits at the very center of contemporary society as an international colossus whose ranks number in the hundreds of thousands. Its experimental animals are an obliging, even grateful human race. We live in a civilization in which, as never before, man is preoccupied with self. As the Protestant ethic has weakened in Western society, the confused citizen has turned to the only alternative he knows, the psychological expert who claims there is a new scientific standard of behavior to replace fading traditions. Mouthing the holy name of science, the psychological expert claims to know all. This new truth is fed to us continuously from birth to the grave." End of quote. Humanistic and transpersonal psychologies have now embraced the entire spectrum of sorcery. For example, the 22nd annual meeting of the Association of Humanistic Psychology, held in Boston, August 21st to 26, 1984, was heavily flavored with Hindu Buddhist occultism. The official daily schedule included early morning yoga, tai chi, meditation. About half of the pre-conference, post-conference institutes involved blatant sorcery, such as subjects as visualization and healing, trance states and healing, operations of alchemy, guided imagery, shamanic, that is, witchcraft, ecstasy, and transformation. Being the wizard we are. The extent to which psychology and education have embraced the pagan occult traditions of the past is favorably summed up in the statement by the late Dr. Beverly Gallienne, consultant to the Los Angeles school system, in an article by her in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. Quote, "The ancients of all cultures filled their folkloric epics with tales of visions, dreams, intuitive insights, and internal dialogues with higher beings whom they saw as the sources of ultimate wisdom and knowledge. By accepting as true the narratives of spiritual seekers from all cultures, we now have evidence of various levels of consciousness possible to human beings. Human potential is inexhaustible and is realized through new modes of exploration, that is, meditation, guided imagery, dream work, yoga, body movement, sensory awareness, energy transfer, that is, healing, reincarnation therapy, and esoteric studies. Meditation and guided imagery activities are the core of the confluent holistic education curriculum." End of quote. Variations of such psychology have infiltrated the church, Christian schools, and seminaries because pastors and other leaders have accepted the claim that it is scientific and neutral. Most Christians have failed to recognize the fact that Christianity and psychotherapy are actually two rival and irreconcilable religious systems. Their union as Christian psychology creates an unequal yoke that brings into the church the seductive influence of secular psychology. And now, with the leading psychologists and psychiatrists so heavily involved in selfism and sorcery, Christian psychology inevitably succumbs to some of the same delusions and brings them into the church. A good example is the Training in Spiritual Direction seminars that began in a Protestant church in Austin, Texas. The brochure reads in part, quote, "The experiential focus utilizes relaxation, guided fantasy, inner dialogue, gestalt, and dream work, founded on the principles of spiritual direction in the Old and New Testaments within the mystical, ascetical tradition of the Roman Catholic Church. The conceptual material is biblically sound and makes use of the perspectives of contemporary psychology, especially transpersonal. The dominant schools of psychology included are analytical, Jung, and psychosynthesis, Accigioli. Significant use is made of psychoanalytic, Horney, Erickson, Byrne, and so forth, and humanistic thought, Fromm, Pearls, Maslow, and so forth. End of quote. Paganism in modern dress. Feminist leader Gloria Steinem has declared, quote, "By the year 2000, we will, I hope, raise our children to believe in human potential, not God." End of quote. Today's psychologists are trying to plumb the mysterious depths of what many people now think is unlimited human potential through fantasy and role-playing in order to develop the power of the imagination. Napoleon Hill's technique of visualizing guides, which has been used by witch doctors and other occultists for thousands of years, is now one of the most exciting and widely used methods of transformation being promoted by many psychologists. Gene Houston, for example, co-founder of the Foundation for Mind Research, where LSD was first licensed by the government to be used in researching hidden depths of the mind, uses many techniques from ancient sorcery, among them the visualization and even materialization of what she calls the group spirit that manifests in seemingly real form. Demons don't even have to hide their activity anymore. Their existence would not be admitted by most psychologists and many clergymen, no matter how hard they tried to prove themselves to be real. Whatever happens is considered to be the product of one's allegedly unlimited imagination. Napoleon Hill was convinced that his 9 counselors, though so real that they frightened him at first, were only imaginary. Hill wrote, quote, "The 9 men from the past were Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. Every night I held an imaginary council meeting with this group, whom I called my invisible counselors. In these imaginary council meetings, I called on my cabinet members for the knowledge I wished each to contribute, addressing myself to each member. After some months of this nightly procedure, I was astounded by the discovery that these imaginary figures became apparently real. Each of these 9 men developed individual characteristics which surprised me. These meetings became so realistic that I became fearful of their consequences and discontinued them for several months. The experiences were so uncanny, I was afraid if I continued them, I would lose sight of the fact that these meetings were purely experiences of my imagination. This is the first time that I have had the courage to mention this. I still regard my cabinet meetings as being purely imaginary, but they have led me into glorious paths of adventure, and I have been miraculously guided past scores of difficulties. I now go to my imaginary counselors with every difficult problem which confronts me and my clients. The results are often astonishing." End of quote. The power of the imagination? So it is with today's psychologists who use the same basic sorcerer's technique. The often remarkable results these mysterious entities produce, though inexplicable to science, are nevertheless credited to the power of the imagination. In seminars called The Power of the Imagination, sponsored by Marquette University, psychologists have trained thousands of persons across America to visualize inner guides similar to Hill's and with equally astonishing results. Though it can easily be proved that the imagination is not unlimited, who can visualize a new prime color, for example, this deceptive belief has gained a strong foothold within the church. The power of the imagination is becoming confused with inspiration and power of the Holy Spirit. Korean pastor Paul Yoongi Cho declares that it was through the power of the imagination that God created the world, and that because man is a fourth dimension spirit being like God, he too, whether occultist or Christian, can create his own world through the power of his imagination. Occultists have long known that the most powerful way to tap into the spirit dimension is through visualization, about which we will have more to say later. Norman Vincent Peale calls this positive imaging, which he says is a word derived from imagination, and his positive thinking carried one step further. Peale has said, quote, "There is a powerful and mysterious force in human nature, a kind of mental engineering, a powerful new-old idea. The concept is a form of mental activity called imaging. It consists of vividly picturing, in your conscious mind, a desired goal or objective, and holding that image until it sinks into your unconscious mind, where it releases great untapped energies. When the imaging concept is applied steadily and systematically, it solves problems, strengthens personalities, improves health, and greatly enhances the chances for success in any kind of endeavor. Quote, "The idea of imaging has been around for a long time, and it has been implicit in all the speaking and writing I have done in the past." End of quote. If it strutted and danced down church aisles in its authentic paint and feathers, as the anti-biblical religion it is, paganism would be promptly rejected by Christians. But when dressed in a business suit, clerical collar, or robe and introduced to the congregation as the latest innovation in theology, psychology, medicine, business success, and self-improvement techniques for developing human potential, seductive sorcery is warmly embraced as a true friend and supporter of Christianity. What we will be documenting in subsequent chapters is far more than isolated pockets of error. Not only is its extent staggering, but sorcery within the church follows a pattern that fits precisely the biblical warnings from Jesus and his disciples concerning a great deception that would sweep the world in the last days. Therefore, it is necessary, first of all, to understand the prophetic context in which the seduction is taking place.
Please visit our website, thebereancall.org, to access our radio archives going back to 1999 and our newsletter going back to 1986. We offer daily updates by email or visit us on Facebook or Twitter. Are you looking for information about a specific topic? Go to thebereancall.org and click on Topics at the top of the page. Our online store is thebereancall.com. We offer a wide variety of books, tracts, CDs, and DVDs. Note that most of our ebooks are free. I'm Gary Carmichael. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you can join us again next week. Until then, we encourage you to search the Scriptures 24/7.
Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back.